we? Where we are seeing, new educators, our nurses, our firefighters, our EMTs, all of these people who support us on a daily basis with essential services, who are really struggling to be able to live anywhere near to the communities in which they are providing those services. So, and this just provides some additional pieces on that, right? So you saw 20% of home resales below 250,000, and yet only 3% of new construction sales in those 2 years were below 250,000. And we know, again, those numbers have, the cost of housing in the last 3 years has just risen exponentially. Many of us, if we own a home, are probably in homes that we know we could not afford if we were to buy that home today, based on the way the cost of housing has increased.
We're going to talk a little bit later about what this actually looks like. We're going to humanize this a little bit, but I want you to keep a statistic in mind. We were talking about how the price increase is 20% over the last 5 years. Teacher salaries increase 2 to 3% every year. 3 times 5 is 15, but the market has increased by 20%.
So to touch on that too, this was pulled out from the housing study as well, just discussing that with the rising house costs for both owners and renters, that finding and maintaining budget-friendly housing is increasingly difficult, which again is not, I think we're all pretty aware of the trends and following the direction that housing market is going. But as Sandra said, this is really a human issue, and it's impacting all sectors. And so to Brian's point from this morning about, someone asked a question, I believe, on how do you humanize an issue that maybe isn't impacting everyone. I think the reality is, especially when we're talking about our workforce, how our workforce is housed, is that this issue really impacts everyone. So we're going to talk a little bit too about what's known as the ALICE population, and we're going to kind of, just share that discussion amongst each other.
So ALICE, sorry, need to hold that back a little bit. ALICE is asset limited income constrained employed. And so what we are looking at there is people who do not meet poverty guidelines for assistance, but as the United Way typically says, they are one kind of life incident away from being in a precarious situation. So I think this morning's talk did a good job of highlighting that, right? You have a flat tire and suddenly you are faced with, am I able to pay rent or do I deal with the flat tire? So these are people who do not make enough money to be, secure and know that anything that impacts them in an unexpected way will be able to be resolved, but also are not at a federal poverty level where they qualify for some of the traditional federal assistance programs.
So we also wanted to share with you some statistics with housing cost burden in Virginia. And so I know these charts are a little bit hard to read. We are recording all of the sessions, and all of the slides and sessions will be available on the GWRC website. And that will also go out to participants as well. So don't feel like you need to I recognize the screens are small, so. But I can kind of talk through this chart breaks down by owner and by renter for the region. So this is within Planning District 16, how many individuals and households are cost burdened. So there's the top chart of circles is owners, and the bottom chart is renters. You can also see on the bottom, it's a scale for cost burden rates by locality. And so when you're looking at the numbers of how many individuals are cost burdened within our region just with housing, it becomes really staggering of how many people are impacted by that, and then the direct correlation that that has on our ability within the region to attract, maintain, provide, benefits for, have a draw for a robust and diverse workforce. So I know we were talking a lot about AMI, average median income, and kind of what that looks like. So they've kind of broken it down within the industry into different percentages of AMI. So 80, 50, and 30% of AMI, and that also can sound very abstract, recognizing that we're all like working in industries that have a lot of acronyms, that have a lot of kind of abstract ways of talking about these issues. But we really wanted to break down, what that really looks like. So when you're talking about below 30% AMI for a population, you're really talking about homelessness, rapid rehousing, and supportive housing services. So you're talking about centralized intakes, emergency shelters. We have a number of service organizations working within the region that do operate these types of facilities. For rapid rehousing and supportive housing, you have mission-driven nonprofits, federal, state, and local grants. As many of you know, the George Washington Regional Commission is the lead agency for the Fredericksburg Regional Continuum of Care, which is a really robust program to support specifically this population, and when we're talking about unsheltered homelessness. When you get more into 30 to 50% AMI, you're talking about public housing, housing vouchers. So we have public housing authorities, which we do not have a public housing authority within this region at all. You're talking about voucher administrators and primarily federal funds. I think also to echo Brian's sentiment from this morning, a lot of the funds within this space, especially talking about affordable housing for both workforce and unsheltered populations, you're really talking about mostly federal funds. And then moving from 50 to 80% AMI, you're talking about affordable rental and market affordable properties, whether that's rentals or purchasing. This is primarily what we're talking about of those that are falling into workforce housing are ranging really anywhere from that 30 to 80% AMI level. And then above 80%, you do have standard market rate rentals and home ownership. So a lot of the workforce of what we're talking about falls within that middle range. And it can be very difficult, of course, with a lot of the different topics that we're all learning about today to fill that hole for the need for that workforce housing. So this is another kind of breakout of what this looks like, but it talks specifically, and I'm going to read some of these figures for you all about within the region itself. So the number of households that are less than 30% AMI within Planning District 16 is 25,304 households. So that's a pretty staggering number. When you're talking about 30 to 50% AMI, that kind of middle range, we're talking about 30,500 households. 50 to 80% AMI, you're talking about 25,445 households. And then 80 to 100% AMI, another 24,572. So respectively, less than 30%, you have 8% cost burden. 30 to 50% AMI, you have 23% cost burden. And then 50 to 80% AMI, you have 17%. So if you look at, all those pieces of the pie, that makes up a big portion of our population here within this region.
So I said a little bit earlier, what does that look like? How do we humanize this? This is what our teachers make. This is a first-year teacher and a 15-year teacher. We're going to go in a little bit on the next slide what Alice is. These statistics or these figures are about 6 months old. Everyone did get, like I said, a 2% increase recently. Can you move us forward? 40% of your teachers are ALICE population. That's just teachers. When you start adding in some other essential workers like our paraprofessionals, our bus drivers, our attendants, our nutrition services workers, that starts to climb. Almost 50% of your educational workforce is classified as ALICE. There are some things that we can do to help that, and our legislators in the audience, if you understand COCA, the cost to compete adjustment, that line in receiving the cost to compete adjustment is Stafford. So our teachers can literally commute 10 miles north and make significantly more than they're making here in Stafford. We say that Stafford is a great place to live, work, and learn. We have incredible career and technical education programs. We're teaching our students how to be electricians, how to work on HVAC systems, how to be a plumber. We're just not providing them with a place that they can live when they graduate.
I think another thing worth highlighting here is the stagnation in salaries after the recession of '07, right? And this was highlighted a little bit in the session this morning, but as someone who taught on the K-12 side for over 13 years, one of the things that you saw was that essentially your salary decreased after '07 because it did not come anywhere close to meeting just average cost of living adjustments that would have typically taken place previous to this. Many of you all probably saw the JLARC study that came out this summer around state funding for the education system, and of course that's a factor as well in kind of, again, the same sort of situation, that state investment in public education decreased following that recession of '07, and it just has never returned to those previous levels. And so that's been an impact as well on localities needing to bear a higher share of funding in order to be able to stay competitive. And then you add in things like the COCA and how the line of Northern Virginia has been shifting outward. And so you have those impacts as well that factor into this. On the higher education side, sometimes it can be even harder to keep salaries competitive. I know a number of people on the K-12 side who have pursued doctoral degrees, and it doesn't necessarily behoove them to shift over to the higher education side and invest in that next generation of educators and public servants. And so that's another factor contributing here.
Also, we really wanted to share, kind of a multi-perspective approach here. And so another piece of the story is also talking about how workforce housing impacts small businesses. And so I want to just kind of share some perspective, being a small business owner myself within the region, and also talking about entities that work to advocate on behalf of small businesses like Main Street. So the issue of affordable housing impacts everyone, right? I think we've kind of determined that, but certainly from a small business perspective, and especially when we're talking about locally run, like mom and pop small businesses that are within our communities that we know and love. It really impacts small business in a unique way, because you have a situation where, it can make it very difficult already to attract and retain workforce, and we see this kind of throughout small business, right? Currently, especially post-COVID, worker retention has been a real difficulty, and the housing piece, access to housing around where people are working, adequate transportation systems, right? All of those things play a role within that conversation. But I do think it's a unique way that it impacts small businesses in particular when it comes to having a workforce that can live where they work. So we're really facing certainly, and I can speak from the perspective, I live and have a business in downtown Fredericksburg. And it's difficult for me as a business owner to afford to live in downtown, and that's not even talking about our employees and our staff that work beside us and with us in those small businesses. And so when we're talking about affordable housing for small businesses, you're really talking about all the people that make up the fabric of our economy, right? Everyone has businesses within the region that they know and love. And there can be kind of this misconception that when you're talking about something like affordable housing, that it's very nebulous. But really, we're talking about people who are running the shops and restaurants that you love. They are working the bars that you visit. They are helping staff, all of these locations. And it has a huge impact, on how small businesses can actually retain staff. And so speaking for, from a Main Street perspective, which to give a little bit of background for anyone who's not familiar, Main Street is a national program that has local chapters that focuses on small business advocacy, historic preservation, and economic vitality efforts. And so certainly within Fredericksburg, we work very closely with the city of Fredericksburg, with officials, and there's a wide range of cooperation. I think everyone is really kind of on the same page from a Main Street perspective that affordable housing is going to be a critical issue for small businesses moving forward. So much so that even from like a national Main Street perspective, there's been a number of conversations and studies going on and being conducted that do discuss affordable housing for Main Street communities in particular. So again, I know this graphic's like kind of small, and I'm happy to link the studies themselves, but Main Street America has also started to incorporate these conversations around housing and how it impacts our small businesses. It has done some studies about how different communities can work to really combat some of those challenges that we're facing. Because I think the reality from a small business perspective, also I think I can speak for the panel in saying across industry-wide, across different sectors, we're losing access to our workforce due to lack of affordable housing within our area. So we also we have some discussion questions, and Sandra and Dr. Towery can discuss too a little bit more from their specific industries. But we also want to kind of lead some discussions with everyone, to help kind of brainstorm where do we go from here. That's a big item, for us within this summit in general, but certainly within our panel, we want to kind of discuss some solutions.
So one of the things that I wanted to mention a little bit earlier, Rebecca talked about the JLARC study, and I don't know if you've seen recently, they just put out something on affordable childcare. So when we're talking about 50% of your education workforce is ALICE classified, and we're talking about one issue can take that from affordable housing to something. It doesn't have to be a crisis. It doesn't have to be a flat tire. We almost had a government shutdown. We're by Dahlgren, we're by Quantico. A lot of these families are two-teacher households. What about maternity leave and a teacher who has to take off for maternity leave and now she can't find or he can't find affordable childcare? So we're literally a half an issue away most days from our teachers not being able to come back and work for us.
So we do have a few different discussion questions up there. One of the things, and this is in the third question, but one of the things we know is that these are not simple issues, right? And they are very intertwined with multiple things. Sandra just mentioned childcare, right? It's not always just issues of affordable housing, which of course is our focus today, but it's affordable housing plus childcare plus loans from getting the higher degrees needed to be an educator, or some of those different things. So one of the things we think is important is for everyone to have time to discuss and kind of brainstorm solutions. And what we'd like to do is kind of give everybody about 15 minutes or so to have some discussions at your tables, talk through some of these concepts, brainstorm possibilities, right? It doesn't have to be one-size-fit-all solutions, but what are kind of the little pockets of things that could be done differently? How can communities come together to support making sure that firefighters can live and work in the same locality? So I would encourage you all to take some time and talk that through, and I'll give an idea that one thing that there were a couple things that popped in my mind just as we were having discussions and planning, right? One thing that popped in my mind was, some of you all may be familiar with Stafford County Public Schools has something known as the Boots program. Is anybody familiar with the Boots program? A couple people. So I love the Boots program. It's an amazing program where high school students design, build, and sell a house in the community, right? It's an amazing opportunity for high school students to get real world experience and to contribute to the housing market, right? One of the things I started thinking about is, wow, I wonder if there's the ability to do some scalability there. Could you have other school divisions in the area become part of a larger Boots network? You know, could that be something where some of that housing is dedicated towards essential employees? So those are just some of the things I started thinking through. Not saying that that's where it goes, but what I'd encourage is just kind of being open to that brainstorming process. I sat last week on a training session around innovation, and one of the things he really encouraged is when you're in the brainstorming phase, don't sit there and say, oh, that's not a good idea. Just think of all the ideas and then start to talk them through and unpack what might work, what doesn't work, those sorts of things, because you never know. You know, I was reading an article yesterday around the Fredericksburg Trails nonprofit in the area, right? And someone came up with, we could use more biking trails and walking trails in the area, and they came together as a group, and they've been putting in these trails in Mott's Run and the Quarry, and it's, you know, a grassroots effort to do that. So it was a little bit of inspiration in coming to this to think through what are those areas where even just community members can come together to come up with creative solutions to support essential employees in the area.
Yeah, I think something too, there's so many different industries and areas represented here. We have elected officials from all of our localities. We have service providers that are working within housing. We have community members who have a real stake within this issue. So I think in discussing and some brainstorming some of the discussion questions, we would love to hear your experiences and your professional expertise within these regions of how all these entities can really come together and collaborate. We can read some of them off. And I apologize, we're having some technical problems, but we're going to just go ahead and kind of read off the first question. We can take a few minutes and kind of discuss, and then we can come back. And then, of course, we want to, we can go ahead and give you the discussion questions. And then we also want to take questions from you all, from us. So one of the questions that we wanted to discuss is, how does the lack of affordable housing impact recruitment and retention across sectors? So again, I think coming from all your various perspectives, this can be a really fruitful discussion, and we want to be able to hear your perspectives on that. The second question is, how are essential employees, teachers, healthcare workers, first responders impacted by the high cost of living, and how is the community affected overall? And then the third question is, of course, we can know and recognize that these issues are complex. So how do we generate public awareness and support to achieve those creative solutions that we're talking about? So we have about 30 minutes left within our session. So I think we can take about 15 minutes and discuss at your tables, try to talk about some solutions, and then we can discuss as a wider panel as well.
School systems or pipelines to jobs. We talked a lot about STEM at our table and attractions. And so I think one of the first things we need to do is talk about ourselves as a region. So Caroline, Stafford, Fredericksburg, Spotsy, and King George is one thing, not 5 separate entities. And I don't know how we get everyone on board on that, but that's a big goal of the Chamber of Commerce as well as workforce. So I'd love to talk to you.
So I'm a bit of an outsider. I pretend to be a transportation planner with FAMPO. But because I'm an outsider, I look at it kind of a little differently. The problem is that to build housing units is getting more expensive. the unit cost of labor is going up. The unit cost of materials is going up. So if you want to produce large amounts of affordable housing, the third item that's involved in that is land. And you know what's pushing the cost of land up in the United States across the entire country is the zoning and planning approvals. And almost every time I read in the newspaper or hear on the radio about a zoning approval, it almost always sounds like the outcome is making it harder to build more and more expensive to build more. We really, in the US, and I'm hoping to become a US citizen sometime in the future, we really in the US have to grasp the nettle of the public hearings and 4 people coming to the public hearings and screaming their head off and convincing the powers that be to vote no on that rezoning application or that planning decision or whatever the case is. Until we get to find a way to deal with that problem, the land is going to become per unit more expensive every time you make a zoning decision. And if the labor cost is going up and the material cost is going up and your zoning is pushing the cost of the land up, where's the money going to come from to pay the difference between what it actually costs to build the unit and what somebody can afford to pay for that unit, right? It's just simple math. And the thing that I think we can really change is not the salary costs, because we don't want to pay people less. The material costs, very difficult to get down. Sometimes it happens. But you can make the land effectively cost less if you can build more units or more building or higher floors. It's the only way, folks. And it's not just a problem in this region. It's not just a problem in the state of Virginia. If you look at San Francisco, you want to cry, right? There's only so much land, and if we zone it all for single-family units, large land plots, what do you call them? It's a no-sum game. You can never get enough affordable housing. Or even, maybe we should talk of housing that's affordable, rather than this category of affordable housing and all the good things you're talking about today.
Thank you so much. I think we'll give just any final last words for our panel.
I really appreciate everyone that shared out today. I appreciate the multiple perspectives. I would love to have more time to hear from those perspectives, but I appreciate you allowing us to join you and kind of share out from our lenses about the region's development.
I want to thank everyone who showed up today too. We don't want that conversation to end. Go to your local officials. If you have ideas, I believe our email addresses are going to be made available. Send them to us. Go talk.
Yeah, I also just want to echo that sentiment. Thank you everyone for joining and participating. I think everyone had some really robust discussions, and that's exactly what our intention was. So thank you all. I think we're going to do another kind of networking session in between this and the lunch, which they're going to open up all the partitions again for lunch. So same room, everything will be together after that. So thank you guys very much.
So just one note on lunch. They are going to open up the walls, pick a spot for lunch, and then they are going to call and dismiss kind of tables to go out and get food so that there's just not a mad rush for the food all at once. So just logistically, that's how they're planning to do the lunch. Thank you.